The dust swirled across the wooden platform as Martha clutched her worn carpetbag, her knuckles white against the faded fabric. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the small frontier station, and she could feel the weight of failure pressing against her chest like a physical burden. 3 months she had traveled from Boston, answering an advertisement for a schoolteacher in this godforsaken corner of Montana, only to be told upon arrival that the position had been filled 2 weeks prior. The town council hadn't even bothered to send word. Now she stood here with exactly $12 to her name, enough for a ticket back east but not enough to restart the life she had left behind. The shame of returning home empty-handed, of admitting defeat to her sisters who had warned her against this foolish adventure, felt worse than any hardship she might face out here in the wild territories. The train whistle echoed across the prairie, a mournful sound that seemed to mirror the desperation in her heart. Martha adjusted her bonnet with trembling fingers and tried to compose herself. She had been so certain this was her chance for independence, for a life beyond the suffocating expectations of Boston society. At 28, she was considered firmly on the shelf, too old for marriage prospects and too educated for her own good, as her mother frequently reminded her. The teaching position had seemed like Providence itself, a way to use her learning and escape the pitying glances of former classmates now surrounded by husbands and children. But Providence, it seemed, had a cruel sense of humor. She blinked back tears, refusing to let them fall where anyone might see. She had pride left, if nothing else. The sound of boots on wood made her turn, and she found herself looking up at a tall figure silhouetted against the bright sky. As her eyes adjusted, she saw a man in his mid-30s, broad-shouldered and weathered by sun and wind. He wore a brown duster coat despite the heat, and a wide-brimmed hat shadowed a face marked by both hardship and something gentler, something she couldn't quite name. Behind him, partially hidden by his frame, 2 small girls peered out at her with identical curious expressions. They couldn't have been more than 7 or 8 years old, dressed in simple frontier dresses that had seen better days, their hair braided but coming loose in the wind. The man removed his hat, revealing dark hair and eyes that held an unexpected kindness. He cleared his throat, seeming almost as uncomfortable as she felt. His voice when he spoke was deep and rough, like gravel mixed with honey. He introduced himself as James Cartwright, owner of a ranch some 15 miles north of town. He apologized for intruding but said he couldn't help overhearing her conversation with the station master about the teaching position. Martha felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment, wondering how much of her humiliation this stranger had witnessed. She straightened her spine and met his gaze directly, determined not to appear as pathetic as she felt. Yes, she confirmed coolly. She had come for a position that no longer existed and would be returning east on the next available train. She hoped her tone conveyed that this was none of his concern and that she required neither pity nor charity from strangers. But James Cartwright didn't look away or make his excuses to leave. Instead, he shifted his weight, glanced down at the 2 girls beside him, and then back at Martha with an expression that seemed to carry the weight of unspoken struggles. These were his daughters, he said quietly. Emma and Sarah. Twins. Their mother had died giving birth to them, and for 8 years he had been raising them alone with only the help of his ranch hands and an elderly housekeeper who had passed away last winter. He wasn't a man comfortable with speeches, he admitted, but he found himself in a situation that required plain speaking. His daughters needed education, proper female guidance, and care that he simply couldn't provide no matter how hard he tried. He had considered sending them back east to his late wife's family, but the thought of being separated from them was unbearable. They were all he had left of Catherine, and they were his entire world. Martha stood frozen, unsure where this conversation was leading but feeling something shift in the air around them. James continued, his words coming faster now as if he needed to get them out before he lost his courage. He wasn't proposing anything improper, he clarified quickly. His ranch had a separate cabin that had belonged to the housekeeper, small but well-maintained, with its own fireplace and decent furniture. He could offer room and board, a modest salary, and the opportunity to teach his daughters everything they needed to know. Reading, writing, arithmetic, music if she knew any, all the refinements that a frontier ranch couldn't provide. It would be hard work, he warned. The ranch was isolated, and frontier life wasn't easy for anyone, especially women accustomed to city comforts. But it was honest work, respectable work, and he gave his word that she would be treated with utmost propriety and respect. The offer hung in the air between them like a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. Martha's mind raced through the implications. Stay here in Montana, teaching two motherless girls on an isolated ranch, or return to Boston in defeat, to a future of being passed around between relatives who saw her as an obligation and a burden. She looked down at the twins, really looked at them for the first time. They were watching her with expressions that seemed too old for their young faces, as if they had already learned not to hope too much for anything. Their dresses, though clean, were clearly homemade and practical rather than pretty. Their hair, though braided, lacked the neat ribbons and careful styling that young girls usually delighted in. They stood close to their father, one on each side, like small satellites orbiting their sun, and she could see in their eyes a longing that pulled at something deep in her chest. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, overwhelmed by the sudden turn her life had taken. Just minutes ago she had been certain of her path, resigned to failure and return. Now she stood at a crossroads she hadn't anticipated, faced with a choice that felt impossibly weighty. James seemed to sense her hesitation and spoke again, his voice softer this time. He wasn't asking her to decide her whole future right now, he said. Just come to the ranch for a trial period. 1 month. If at the end of that time she wanted to leave, he would personally ensure she had safe passage to wherever she wanted to go and enough money for a fresh start. He wasn't trying to trap her or take advantage of her situation. He was simply a desperate father who had watched his daughters grow up without the maternal influence they needed, and who saw in this chance meeting a possible answer to prayers he'd been too proud to voice. Martha found her voice finally, though it came out shakier than she would have liked. She asked about the specifics, the practical details that her logical mind needed to grasp. What exactly would be expected of her? James explained that primarily she would educate the twins, teaching them their lessons each day. Beyond that, if she was willing, perhaps she could help them with the things a mother would teach, things he didn't know how to explain or demonstrate. How to dress properly, how to conduct themselves, the small social graces that mattered even on the frontier. The housekeeper had done her best, but she had been elderly and set in her ways, more concerned with keeping them fed and safe than with preparing them for the wider world. As for household duties, he had ranch hands who handled the cooking and basic cleaning. He wasn't looking for a servant. He was looking for a teacher and mentor for his daughters. Something in his words, in the honest desperation and hope in his eyes, broke through Martha's defenses. She thought of her own childhood, of the mother who had taught her to read and play piano, who had shown her that a woman's mind was worth cultivating even if society didn't always agree. These girls had been robbed of that, growing up on a harsh frontier without gentle hands to guide them or a soft voice to encourage them. She thought too of her own situation, of how few real choices were actually available to unmarried women of her station. This might not be the position she had imagined, but it was honest work that mattered, work that could make a real difference in these children's lives. And perhaps, in helping them, she might find the purpose and independence she had been seeking all along. She looked at James Cartwright and saw not just a desperate father but a man trying his best in impossible circumstances. A man who loved his daughters enough to swallow his pride and ask a stranger for help. She looked at Emma and Sarah and saw two souls hungry for the guidance and care they had never known. And she looked beyond them at the vast Montana prairie stretching endlessly under the blue sky, wild and free and full of possibilities that Boston could never offer. The train whistle sounded again, closer now, and she realized with startling clarity that she didn't want to board it. She didn't want to return to a life of limitations and low expectations. She wanted to stay and see what she might become in this untamed place, teaching these girls and perhaps learning something about herself in the process. She set down her carpetbag and extended her hand to shake his. Her voice was steady now, stronger than it had been in weeks. She would accept his offer for the trial month. 1 month to teach his daughters and see if this arrangement could work for all of them. James's face broke into a smile of pure relief, and he shook her hand with a grip that was firm but careful, as if he was afraid she might dissolve like a mirage if he wasn't gentle. The twins looked at each other and then at Martha, hope dawning in their expressions like sunrise breaking over the mountains. They didn't say anything, but Sarah reached out tentatively and touched the fabric of Martha's skirt, and Emma offered a shy smile that transformed her serious little face into something beautiful. As they gathered Martha's few belongings and headed toward a wagon waiting near the station, she glanced back one last time at the train pulling into the station, at the life she was choosing not to board. There was no regret in her heart, only a strange mixture of nervousness and anticipation. She had come west looking for a teaching position and independence. She hadn't found exactly what she expected, but perhaps she had found something better, something more real and meaningful. 2 little girls who needed her. A father trying to do right by his children. And a chance to build something new in this wild, beautiful, challenging land. The rejection that had felt like the end of everything just an hour ago now seemed like the beginning of something else entirely, something she couldn't yet name but could feel taking shape like a promise on the wind. As the wagon rolled away from the station toward the distant ranch, Martha allowed herself to hope that perhaps Providence hadn't abandoned her after all, but had simply been leading her toward a different destination than the one she had planned.